You're listening to Talking Threat Intelligence, a podcast dedicated to uncovering the new challenges of today's threat landscape. Each episode, we connect with some of the world's leading practitioners to share stories from the front lines of corporate security. And now, on to the show.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Talking Threat Intelligence. I'm your host, Robert Value. And joining me back on the show today for the second time is one of my favorite guests, Drew Neckar, President and Principal Consultant at Security Advisors Consulting Group. Drew, thanks for coming back on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Robert. I really appreciate it. It's always fun talking with you.
Now, Drew, before we hit record, you made a really good point. You said something about the epidemic of mass shootings that we have across the country right now. One of the mistakes that you say that we're making is we're spending so much time reviewing the tragedies where things went wrong, but we don't often review the near misses and review the things where they went right. And I thought that was really interesting. What exactly did you mean by that?
Say what you will about how we're going to prevent the next mass shooting, which we have, it seems like lately on a weekly basis in this country. But we do. After an incident occurs in the news, in the security industry itself, everyone is focused on dissecting, okay, what could we have done to prevent this? When I think, and from my personal experience, there are a lot of things that could have developed into mass shootings that were prevented and were stopped ahead of time. And I think we are really missing the ball by not looking more closely at some of those and looking at, okay, what elements prevented this from happening? And it may not necessarily be a security program element directed only at mass shooting. It may well be pieces just of a well-functioning security program that helped divert that shooter to something else, help detect it beforehand, help the organization defend against it prior to it occurring. Because frankly, in a mass shooting, once the actual shooting has started, it's too late. Yes, then you can work on response, and we've seen some tragedies with failures in response, or at least what we're assuming at this point are failures in response. But in my mind, it is getting ahead of that. A number of people have used the term getting left of bang. So before the shooting happens, what can we do to prevent it? And yes, there's all sorts of things. There's threat assessment. There's some great work being done there in identifying potential violence before it occurs, but also what elements of a security program can stop it and help defend against it and prevent it. And that's why I wanted to talk with you today when we started discussing what we could talk about, because I had one incident in my past at a hospital that I worked at where that did happen. We came really close to having a mass shooting, no doubt in my mind, but there were several things that worked out that kept that from happening.
That's a really interesting point, Drew. And that's the story is what I want to dive in today and some of the lessons learned. But, like you were saying about how a lot of the training and the focus is on right now, I see the things of like duck, hide, and fight in response, but your employees aren't really equipped to deal with this situation after a 30-minute or a half-day training seminar, whereas getting ahead of the curve and preventing it is just way, way, way easier if we can get ahead of these tragedies when possible. But why don't we dive in then right into your story? Why don't you take us to the very beginning when you were working in this situation? What was going on? Let's go down the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And this happened 2022 now. This happened in 2008. So active shooter response wasn't quite as developed as it is now. But still, it was something that people were aware of. It was something that was occurring on a semi-regular basis in the country. But I think the story still has a few points that are worth looking at because of what happened. So to set the stage a little bit, at this point, I was fairly early in my career. I was a night shift supervisor for the security department of a hospital. This hospital was located in La Crosse, Wisconsin. It was fairly early in the morning. I was actually the night shift supervisor manning our control center. The hospital had a security control center where we monitored all the cameras. The rest of the security department, we had 2 security officers working in the building at the time, other than the person in the control center. So there were 3 of us to cover 2 million square feet.
So it sounds like pretty ordinary day, slightly short-staffed, slightly distracted.
Yep.
Normal
Absolutely.
Stuff.
So the incident in question, what happened, and we didn't know it at the time, but going back and looking at the video and following through on this, at 7:35 in the morning, so right around shift change time when people are coming in and out of the hospital, our subject, I'll call him for this, walks into the hospital through it was an employee-only entrance, but it was equipped with electronic access control, but the door wasn't locked during the day because it had become an inconvenience and people had complained about having to pull their card out and use it to get into the hospital. So the door was left open. But about 7:35 in the morning, this guy comes walking in through the employee entrance wearing a long black trench coat. He was a white male in his mid-40s. Nothing really strange about him other than the long black trench coat and on a warm spring day.
Slightly off.
Yeah, slightly. Walks in through the door, walks around on the first floor of the hospital for a couple minutes, then walked into the hospital cafeteria, which was only probably 100 feet from the security office itself where I was. And when he walks into the cafeteria, he walks kind of a loop around the cafeteria, then walks into the back of the area, the dining area, and just stands there leaning against the wall for several minutes. I think looking back at the video, he entered the cafeteria at 7:40. At 7:47, one of the cafeteria workers recognized that, hey, this is a little bit out of the ordinary. In here, yes, we have a lot of people coming into the cafeteria in the morning to get breakfast, but this guy's not behaving in the same way that people normally do when they come into the cafeteria. So she fell back on kind of the security awareness training we'd provided and went up and just said hi to the guy. Just, hi, can I help you with anything? Just that real basic kind of point of contact, customer service. Let's feel this out a little bit more. He reacted somewhat strangely to that in her mind. He kind of got flustered, patted his hip and said, don't worry, I got a permit for it, and walked out really quickly. She said, that's strange.
That's off. Yeah.
So she immediately walked over to the security office, which was fairly close, and said, this is probably nothing, but it was weird. It was odd, so I thought I should tell you about it. You're right. That does sound a little bit odd. At this point, all we've got is, okay, this guy's a little bit odd, and he made a statement that he may have a concealed weapon on him. At this point in the state of Wisconsin, there was not such a thing as a concealed carry permit. So just that statement itself, okay, if he is carrying a weapon, that is illegal. That's a breach of the law. Great, but we need to look at this a little bit more.
So at this point, you've got a guy on a hospital campus, very strange, might have a firearm.
Yep, and that's all we had at this point. And this is, 9 minutes after he entered the hospital itself. And
what's going on in your mind at this moment? Like,
at that point, it really wasn't that much. It was, okay, this is probably nothing, but it's still enough that we need to do something and try to identify what's going on here just to make sure it's not. Because, the guy with a gun in a hospital can be a bad thing. There had been a shooting in a hospital a few weeks before this, so that was top of mind for everybody. So as I'm sitting there kind of managing the command and control of the security department at 7:49 in the morning, I got on the radio. We had good radio communications with the security officers on duty, notified both of them that, hey, this is what we've got going on. It may be nothing, but let's see if we can locate this guy and talk to him and just figure out what's going on. What I did from that point is first kind of jumped on our camera system. And all right, we know that at 7:47, this guy was in the cafeteria and left the cafeteria. Let's try to track down where he went from there. So luckily, we had installed cameras all over the hospital. You can't cover everything, but at least we had cameras covering kind of choke points where hallways would intersect. So I was able to fairly quickly identify, all right, this guy left the cafeteria, went this way, got on an elevator. Okay, looks like he got off on the 5th floor of the hospital. So able to direct the security officers, hey, looks like this guy's on the 5th floor in this wing. Notified the 2 security officers over the radio, hey, he's in this area. Why don't you head up there, make contact, just see what's going on. At the same time, thinking, he's at least made a statement that sounds like he may have a firearm. So let's get police started here just to back him up, because the security officers at this hospital, we weren't armed. Keys, handcuffs, and pepper spray. And that was all the equipment the officers had, which is fairly common, but not adequate typically to deal with somebody who's armed with a firearm. So whenever we had to deal with someone armed, we would call local police. So got on the phone to local police department, 911. So stepping back, our security officers go up to our 5th floor, identify, all right, this gentleman is in this hallway. When they saw him, he was talking, almost arguing with one of our employees in the hallway. The security officers approached him from the front. Luckily, we were able to direct and bring him in from separate directions. So our other officer, she came in from behind him as our first officer was making contact with him. And at this time, I'm on the phone with the police dispatcher, just kind of, hey, how you doing? This is what's going on. They're starting officers our way, but no real concerns at this point, kind of routine business. And as our officers approached the guy, and this is in an area that was not on camera, unfortunately, because we didn't have cameras covering every hall. So I was just relying on their radio transmissions of, okay, we've located him. He's on, we're making contact. Then what I found out after the fact is the first officer said, hey, can you open your coat and just show me what you've got on your belt? The guy did and started to make a fast move for a holstered revolver he had on his belt. The two security officers were able to take him to the ground. But from my position in our security dispatch, unable to see any of this, all I had was when he started to open his coat, the one officer saw the gun and she yelled out over the radio, gun, gun, gun. He's got a gun.
And what's going on? Like, what just went on in your mind once that happened?
In my mind now is, oh my God, there's a gun. My officers are unarmed. People are going to get shot. People are going to get hurt. And so
heart rate goes from 70 to 200, blink of an eye.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a terrifying, it probably only lasted 5 seconds, but in my mind, it was minutes because we heard over the radio, and I've got our security radio in one hand and the phone with local police tucked on my shoulder on the other side, talking to the dispatcher. So the dispatcher hears at the same time the officer yell, gun, gun, he's got a gun. And then nothing. So the dispatcher's yelling on their radio to get units started and coming in as quickly as possible. And also screaming in my ear, check their status. What's their status? What's their status? So I'm checking on the radio. What's your status? What's your status? And getting no response because they were busy wrestling with the guy, trying to get him disarmed and take him into custody. But I don't know this at the time. And in my mind is, oh my God, my two officers are dead. What are we going to do to protect everybody else in the hospital? Because we've got a guy, he's got a gun, and now I can't get a hold of my officers. And it was probably only 5 seconds, 5 to 10 seconds, because they were able to take him down to the ground, put him in handcuffs, remove the gun from his holster. It actually kind of skittered out as they were taking him to the ground because he'd been in the process of trying to draw it. And then called on the radio that, okay, subject's in custody. But that 5 seconds felt like minutes.
When you can't see what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there was so much going on kind of in the background of that because at almost the same time, police started arriving. But it was already over by that point. We already had him in custody, which was great. So it was terrifying. And luckily, enough things went right. We had a number of things that went wrong as well. But luckily, enough things went right that we were able to prevent something from, I'm fairly certain, would have happened. But with this, luckily, our officers already had the guy in cuffs. So one of them was able to come down, escort police. They took the guy into custody and took him off to jail because he was, at that point, illegally carrying a concealed weapon. But what did go right for us was those basic security elements.
That's what I want to get into next then. Why don't we talk about some of the basic security elements that really paid off in this situation and maybe some of the lessons learned that you took away that maybe we need to think about for future incidents?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where I think the real benefit of this comes in, because you know what? In the end, it was pretty much a non-incident. So I think what went right for us, probably the biggest thing, is employee engagement. And we had done some significant work at the time on security awareness training for the employees. And not just, okay, this is how you call security, XYZ, this is how you use your badge, but actually trying to empower them and tell them, you are the security for the organization. Yes, we've got several thousand people on campus here and 3 security officers at any one time. But if each one of you is engaged and involved, you can be our eyes and ears. You can help us. And one of the ways you can do that is recognize when something looks out of place. I know now as a consultant, I go into a lot of different organizations. And one thing I love to ask is ask line level employees, what do you do when you see something suspicious? And the majority of the time, they know. They're like, oh, I call security. Here's the number. There's a lot of organizations that they'll say, well, I call security. Okay, what's the number? Oh, I don't know. But I would say the majority of the time, the employees can tell me, yeah, I call security. Here's the number. Then the follow-up question to that is, okay, that's what you do when you see something suspicious. What is suspicious? That usually gets a blank stare, because we, a lot of the time, fail to teach people what is suspicious. We tell them, yeah, you see something suspicious, call us. See something, say something. Great. But what is it that we're seeing? And it's really just giving them that it's something outside the ordinary. That is suspicious. It's somebody behaving in a way that you wouldn't expect them to behave in whatever their particular situation is. In my mind, it's as easy as that. Training people that, and then having that core security response component in place. And I think we did a good job of that here, at least in this case. Great. The employee recognized something, took it on themselves to kind of verify, yes, this is suspicious, and then notified security. And then we could begin that security response process. In this case, one of the keys to that, and just basic physical security, was the ability to identify quickly. In this case, I think it was 2 minutes from the time that we were told, hey, there's this guy, to be able to at least lock down, he's in this wing of the hospital. And we were able to do that through kind of good use of video surveillance, so that we could see at those choke points, those places that somebody had to go through. Okay, great. He went through this intersection, so now he's either going to turn up at this intersection or this intersection, depending on which way he went. Great. We looked at those cameras. He went this direction. And we were able to kind of leapfrog and jump, and all right, this is where he is now. And with that, the use of crime prevention through environmental design within the hospital itself, hospitals are full of back of house corridors, all this stuff, but we had done a pretty good job of funneling people through, and the public through, main corridors. So there weren't that many places to look. Yes, he could have gotten into back of house areas, but didn't flow well that way. It wasn't directed well that way. If you were from the general public, there was a good flow to things. You saw the 2 or 3 corridors you were supposed to follow, and it made sense to follow them. So we were limited on where he might have been. And then once we were able to get him pinned down as to where he was, it was the communications of getting security officers there to confront him, qualified and trained security officers who were able to get there and then able to deal with a situation that escalated from 10 to 200 in less than a second. And frankly, also them having the feeling that their management had their back no matter what. So they were comfortable confronting a person. I walk into a lot of organizations where the security officers are a bit, pardon the pun, but gun shy, and have gotten reprimanded so many times for questioning someone for why they're there, that they're afraid to do it. But these officers, they were trained in verbal de-escalation. They knew they could approach someone and use the appropriate level of force necessary.
What were some of the lessons learned? Like, you had the plan to deal with this issue, but then when the plan hit reality, things didn't always go exactly as you expected. What were some of the interesting takeaways that you took from this incident?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we took from it was kind of in that response component. Once we knew something was going on, of course, any plan, once something happens, is going to fall apart. And we had lots of plans, but we didn't have a perfect plan just for this exact scenario. A big piece of that was we didn't have a good way to get law enforcement to places within the hospital other than the emergency department. Because yes, all our plans said security will meet police at XYZ and get them to the area. Okay, great. You've got 2 security officers. They're both engaged trying to take a gun away from somebody. How do you get police there? And that was a problem. And we did. We, after the fact, worked with our emergency department and said, okay, great. Let's put some things in place. So the next time we call, they're not going to hang up the phone and say, sorry, we're too busy to get police up there. But another thing with that same thing is we had emergency protocols in place. Every hospital has their different colored codes. A lot of them are moving to plain language now, which is great. And we did after the fact here because, yes, I don't remember what the code was there at that point. I think it was a code gray for an active shooter.
But you didn't have an active shooter.
We didn't have an active shooter. We had a suspicious person in the hospital. And then we had, okay, there's an armed suspicious person in the hospital who's engaging with security. But even at that point, and I remember it going through my mind when security was trying to find this guy of, okay, I should put something out just to tell departments to be on the lookout for this guy, but I don't have anything to say. There's nothing I can tell them. There's no way for me to notify them, hey, we've got this going on. If you see this guy, let us know. So we did put things in place after that. We changed from color-coded language to a little bit more plain language and also not quite as set. So we moved from code gray to security alert would be the overhead announcement, followed by what the general public should do. In that case, it would be suspicious person, please notify security if you see. And also, we worked with a couple different, and I don't remember what we landed on, worked with a couple different emergency notification providers to be able to do push notifications to employee cell phones and computers in departments, because we didn't have that at the time. Although this, from the moment this guy walked into our facility to the time the police walked him out was 20 minutes. This was not a huge amount of time. This was 20 minutes in my life, but it felt like years.
Probably the most important 20 minutes of your life, or one
Maybe.
of them.
Maybe, well,
Yeah.
I would say the birth of my children, which was more than 20 minutes. It's probably more important. But but in my professional career, this was eye-opening to me and really educated a lot of the things I try to build on from there in other organizations I've been with and with organizations I consult with. The other piece we saw was access. And I like to speak to kind of that security is cyclical. Every organization, when security is established, develops a baseline and, okay, this is how secure we want to be versus the inconvenience and cost of security. Because it's a balancing act. And over time, with a lack of incidents, cost and convenience tend to win out a little bit over security. So your organization slowly becomes less secure and less secure. And that was the fact here. The door this gentleman came through was capable of being locked, but it was also the most direct route from the doctor's parking lot. And several of the doctors had complained that they didn't like it locked with electronic access control because they didn't want to take their name badge that got them through the door home with them. They liked leaving it in their locker, which is a bad practice anyways, but we won't get into that. So the door was unlocked. If that door had been locked, he would have had to come in through a public entrance where he would have been face-to-face with someone, a greeter, as he walked through the door. And one thing we did somewhat there, but I've also seen done really well at other organizations, is training that greeter staff at those public entrances to do that initial assessment and kind of that behavioral assessment of who's suspicious and who's not. The Israelis do a really good job of behavioral detection and identifying kind of what is suspicious and what's out of place. And that's really one of the things they push really hard on, is that kind of 30-second conversation, because someone who's planning on something nefarious doesn't always have that backstory to back up, okay, this is what I'm doing. And just that little bit of conversation helps identify that. Those were the biggest things. They really were. But some of the other takeaways I had were just that our processes for notification of leadership and managing a major incident on the fly needed work. Because by the time this is over and police have him out the door, it's 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And it was within 10 minutes of law enforcement having him out the door, our hospital started getting calls from national news organizations of, you had a gunman in your hospital. Tell me about it. This is kind of the big 3-letter news agencies. This isn't just the local paper, because something went out on the police scanner. And so local reporters picked it up and they said, oh, gunman in hospital. We need to push this up the chain. So we were getting calls. And of course, nobody in our media relations department is there at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. So who is our spokesperson? How do we get somebody in here? That was a challenge dealing with that. And of course, I was just the night shift supervisor at the time. I had a boss. He was out fishing or something on a Saturday morning and wasn't answering his phone right away. He called back within about 20 minutes. But the first couple calls, it was, dude, You need to answer your phone. We got a problem.
This is not like me messing around. Serious.
Right, exactly. But it was difficult getting anybody, and we did. It was a challenge, and having better procedures in place might have been nice there. Okay, during off hours, what is our process for this, and how do we get a hold of somebody immediately if necessary? Because and if it had been a more significant incident, I'm sure we would have been inundated with reporters on site instead of just phone calls. But we were also getting phone calls from employees of, oh my God, what's happening? Is there a shooter in the hospital? No, it's all taken care of. And how do we get that messaging out ahead of the word of mouth? Because that's starting to spread, rumors starting to spread. And okay, who has to approve that messaging that goes out to employees that says, A, this is what happened. B, you're safe now. Don't worry. Yeah. Because it was spreading throughout the hospital and we had to get ahead of it. But the processes that were in place were, okay, for any message going out, it has to be approved by corporate communications. It has to be approved by the vice president of such and such. 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning, how do we get those people in place to get a message drafted and get it out within 5 minutes to get ahead of this?
Yeah. Well, and especially today, I mean, this was 2008. So I'm assuming Twitter was around and stuff like that. But now, I mean, it's just super instant.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're talking about your communication process can get done by Monday morning, if this was Saturday or Sunday, it's just it's gone already. Way missed the ball. Yeah. And that's a huge negative implications for the reputation of your business. If you don't look like you're handling the situation properly. I mean, obviously the most important thing is stop the shooting, but there's also that crisis response and how your organization looks like. It has an immediate impact on, do I trust going to this place? Can they handle this situation? Very important for any business.
Yeah, absolutely. In the end, it was basically a non-incident, but I think there are so many things that went both right and wrong with it that we can learn from and can really educate our security programs. And I think if we look more within our own organizations as security professionals of, okay, what things could have gone wrong in all these incidents that we've had, and what stopped that? And how can we reinforce that? And a lot of the time it's those basic elements of a security program. It's employee engagement, it's effective physical security, and effective security response capability. That's really what happened here.
I really appreciate that perspective today, Drew. I learned a lot from this conversation, and I think our listeners are going to take a lot away from this conversation today as well. Why don't we take this thing home? Why don't you explain to our listeners what you're working on now and how they can get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. If you want to get a hold of me, probably the best way to do it is on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. It's just Drew Neckar, DREWNECKAR on LinkedIn. Or you can also take a look at my company's website, www.securityadvisorcg.com. So it's Security Advisors Consulting Group. And if you have any questions or if anybody wants any more information, they should feel free to reach out to me. And I'm always happy to talk about this or anything else.
All right, Drew, thanks again for being on the show.
Well, thank you, Robert.
Again, that was Drew Neckar, President and Principal Consultant at the Security Advisors Consulting Group. Thanks again for tuning into the show. Never miss an episode by subscribing on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever podcatcher that you're using nowadays. And if you'd like more insights on building a successful threat intelligence program, be sure to check out our resource page at lifegraphinc.com/blog. That's lifegraphinc.com/blog. And I hope you tune in next time.